Drive to Survive Season 4, Episode 8, Valtteri Bottas versus George Russell. This was set up and primed for Netflix. Let's get into it. Yes, that is correct. This is all about that seat, that second race seat at Mercedes. Valtteri Bottas entering his last year at Mercedes, and also George Russell his last year at Williams. It seemed like a perfect mixed match, if you know what I mean. But we get into the beef between Russell and Valtteri Bottas, which I'm glad. It's a huge season for both drivers. And what's crazy is I was actually beginning to warm to George Russell in this season. I was really loving what I was seeing from him at his time at Williams. But then this episode came and it reminded me why I'm not all the way with George Russell. Not that I dislike him, but I'm just not all the way there with him. You get flashbacks back to the Sakir Grand Prix, the last time George Russell was in a Mercedes, and he did an absolute unbelievable showing in that Mercedes, overtaking Bottas at the start in Sakir when Bottas started on pole. And that's where it looks like the beef had started between those two drivers. Bottas was absolutely shocked that George Russell overtook him at the start because he was thinking, what the hell is this? I thought I'm supposed to be winning this race. It's almost like no point of Russell getting points. However, it will help the team and the constructors. But it's a big year for Toto Wolff as well, because he's having to make that tough decision. He's having to make that decision of whether he goes with the tried and tested or whether he looks to the brand new scope and looks at the new drivers that are coming through. And he mentions this fact about the other big teams having young drivers, and I wonder if that's what's played the part here, because in the end George Russell becomes a Mercedes driver. However, I wonder if he would have had that thought had the Ferraris and Red Bulls of this world and McLarens had actually all the seasoned, experienced Formula One world champions in their team. But from that Sakir Grand Prix, we fast forward to Imola in 2021, where Bottas is not having a good qualifying session. He's not been great at all throughout the entire season, and George Russell's a couple of places behind him, and Imola's a bit wet. It's a bit of a tricky condition, and George Russell has an explosive start to the race. He's actually catching up on Bottas whilst Bottas is having a terrible run in the race, and then the two collide, which from my standpoint, I still believe this now, it was Russell's mistake. I think he's got a tyre that's kind of I think he's gone for the jugular. It's not paid off in the slippery conditions. He's hitting to Bottas, and he's absolutely furious at Bottas as if it was Bottas's fault in the first place. And this was what made me bring it back down to size, that I thought, do you know what, George, there's something you need to work on there, more so on that character. He's so fixated on getting that Mercedes seat. He's so fixated on this battle with Bottas that I think the tension and the emotions got the better of him. As they both come out of a heavy crash, George Russell walks up to him, and just when you think he's going to look and see if he's okay, he ends up actually hitting him. They're going back and forth, swearing at each other and whatever else. And it was very, very striking. I thought to myself, my goodness, I cannot believe that Toto Wolff would make the decision to bring Russell after a moment like that, because it showed so much more than just the accident. It was about the character. It was about how you behaved after that situation. And it's amazing how at the end of it all, Toto Wolff did keep that in mind, by the way. It was amazing just how George Russell was not humble enough to admit that he made the mistake, or even if he didn't make the mistake, didn't come at it in an approach whereby, you know what, it is what it is, it's what happens. Because at the end of the day, he's hit a team that he's trying to join the following year, and then comes out stumping and red hot and everything else. And it was very, very odd. And I just thought to myself, come on, Toto, you've got to pay attention to that. That's not somebody you want to have in your team. And I just felt very, very sorry for Valtteri Bottas. I mean, he was in no man's land in that accident. And just in general, Bottas doesn't actually get that respect that he deserves in Formula One, in my opinion, because he's not Lewis Hamilton. Let's just call it what it is. He's nowhere near Lewis Hamilton's level, but he has won races in that Mercedes. He's got pole positions in that Mercedes as well. And as a teammate, in terms of winning 7 constructors titles, that comes down to Valtteri Bottas as well as Lewis Hamilton. They show moments of the British Grand Prix where Bottas is ahead of Hamilton, but I think Hamilton and Max Verstappen have that amazing crash at the start. And it feels so long ago when that happened, but Bottas plays the team game. Although he's in second place behind Charles Leclerc, Hamilton's in third, a lot quicker, and he sort of yields position and lets Hamilton go through. Hamilton then beats Leclerc, and Hamilton keeps going back to the point that, Valtteri is the reason why we won this race today. Mercedes were aware of that, Hamilton was aware of that, and obviously Bottas sort of torn between the two, knowing that he has to fight for his position, but at the same time fight for for the team. Fair play to Bottas, because it shows the maturity between him and Russell here, where although he could be thinking about himself selfishly here, he thought about the team long term. He thought about what this would mean had he gone for himself and been selfish. He would have lost the race probably, and Mercedes would have got no points, and it would have turned all eyes to Russell. Instead, it put tons of pressure on Russell, because it showed, Bottas kind of showed what they're looking for in a Mercedes driver. Very, very interesting to see Toto Wolff's boss, James, I forgot the last name, where he talks to Toto and says, you know, you need to let Bottas know about team orders. This is before the British Grand Prix. A lot happened in this British Grand Prix that I didn't even take into consideration because of the fact Max Verstappen versus Lewis Hamilton. It was that show, really and truly. But there was a moment where Toto Wolff has been asked to make sure you explain to Bottas. We understand that he's going to be upset and angry, but he has to yield. If Hamilton is in a prime position to win a race, you've got to make that happen. And just sort of seeing Toto, not that he's not humble, but to see him in a very humble state, if that makes sense, was very, very interesting. Great to see, great footage to see by Netflix. Thank you very much. But then we moved to Spa, where the weather was atrocious. It was one of the most fastest race you can imagine, and it's strange because obviously they didn't even give us the race because it was an absolute farcical decision, farcical what happened in that race, and I feel so sorry for those Belgian fans that went all the way out there to go and watch that race and didn't see anything. The weather was awful, terrible, and the Mercedes struggled. Bottas was awful in the wet, and he finished, I think he qualified in P8. George Russell, however, you know, with the track kind of changing, they went onto the intermediate tyres. He did a blistering lap and got into P2, and it was like, you know, you cannot deny that Russell has got the pace, he's got the talent, and I think that's what kind of made Toto's decision in selecting Russell. Sorry, I've forgotten earlier that in the British Grand Prix there was so many rumours, even on the Formula 1 website broadcast, that George Russell will be signing a 2-year deal with Mercedes, and Mercedes were fast to shut it down. And it was kind of interesting because you could see George Russell's expression and face. It was kind of like, oh snap, you know, maybe this isn't going to happen, you know, because of the pace at which Mercedes did that. But Mercedes just did that out of pure class. At the end of the day, the decision hadn't been made. Bottas is their driver. The last thing they want to see is press like that. So fair play to Mercedes for shutting that down. And yeah, I guess it made Russell focus more so on his situation at Williams, and he did brilliant in Spa the following time. So you imagine Bottas qualifies P8, Russell qualifies P2, and in the end, Toto Wolff makes his decision and says, I've got bad news, you'll be fighting against Lewis Hamilton, but the good news is you'll be driving for Mercedes. And it kind of ends like that. Toto Wolff makes the decision to look to the younger generation and to see what the talent comes through. Sad scenes for Bottas because he doesn't know where he's going at this time of recording, and he's sort of left in limbo now. A good driver, but will he get another Formula 1 seat? Who knows? We have to wait and find out during this season. But yes, George Russell gets his gig at Mercedes for 2022, and yeah, Mercedes will be I'm very intrigued to see Russell versus Hamilton in that Mercedes. I'm very, very intrigued. Let's see if some of the old gremlins of George Russell creep up again, or let's see if there's a much more matured and much more measured George Russell. And I wonder how Hamilton will adapt around him, or vice versa.